Can you help with the cleanup? I asked my mother-in-law gently, hoping my tone would elicit a kind response. She shot me a sharp look and snapped, "I'm not your real mother. Clean up yourself and stop complaining. For a daughter-in-law, you have some nerve to ask." Her words hit me like a slap, and I froze. The warm, welcoming smile Shel had always worn seemed to evaporate, replaced by a cold, unyielding stare. "You're joking, right?" I murmured, disbelief tightening my chest. "Why would I joke about that?" Shel replied, her lips curving into a faint, unsettling smile. The air in the room seemed to thicken, and with it, the fragile foundation of my perfect life started to crumble. "My name is Kathleen. Years ago, I met Elijah while working a part-time job during my university years. We clicked instantly, and over the course of 5 years, our bond grew stronger until we decided to marry. Elijah and I worked at the same manufacturing company, where our hectic schedules often left little time for anything else. Strangely, the shared busyness made us closer. Every night, we rode the last train home together, and no matter how tired Elijah was, he always waited for me at the station. His bright smile, his genuine care, it all erased the fatigue of my day and filled me with gratitude for the life we shared. Although my parents had passed away years ago, they left me a significant inheritance, which Elijah and I agreed to save for our future. Life wasn't extravagant, but it was happy, and we cherished the simplicity of it. One evening, as we walked home, Elijah casually said, "Kathleen, my parents want to visit tomorrow. Is that okay?" I felt a nervous flutter but smiled. Of course, they're always welcome. Elijah's parents, Shelley and Bradley, lived nearby and occasionally dropped by. We'd developed a close bond, and they treated me like their own daughter. Shelley was warm and caring, while Bradley, always cheerful, had a knack for filling the room with laughter. I truly felt like I had gained a second family. One day, during one of their visits, Shelley brought up an unexpected proposal. "Kathleen, Elijah," she began, "this house is getting old. What if we all lived together? I think grandchildren aren't far off, and I could help with the household chores." Bradley chimed in with a nod. "I think that's a wonderful idea. Besides, it might make things easier for all of us as we get older." Elijah and I exchanged a look. Bradley had been showing signs of declining health recently, and we'd often worried about him. Living together seemed like a practical solution that could bring us all closer. "I think that could be great," I said, "though, this house might get a little cramped. We'd have to figure out how to make it work." Elijah nodded, agreeing. "We can plan something that works for everyone." Shelley smiled warmly. "Kathleen, you have an inheritance from your parents, right? Perhaps you could use it to build a bigger, more comfortable house for all of us." I blinked, taken aback. The inheritance was something I'd never discussed in detail, not even with Elijah. Shelley's suggestion left me uneasy, her assumption cutting into the private boundary I'd always maintained. Still, her logic made sense. I thought about my parents and how they'd want their legacy to provide for a happy future. Seeing Elijah's and his parents' excitement, I set aside my reservations. "In that case, why not build the perfect house together?" I said, smiling. Construction began soon after, and the project brought a sense of hope and excitement. When the house was finally complete, it felt like a dream, a warm, lively space where we could all grow closer as a family. Life in the new house started beautifully. Shelley often prepared hot meals for me after long workdays, and Bradley would join us in late-night conversations, filling the room with laughter. Every moment felt special, a testament to the decision we'd made to live together. For a time, it seemed I couldn't have made a better choice. Life has a way of throwing unexpected twists our way. My father-in-law's health began to decline, slowly but steadily. Though his condition wasn't life-threatening, he made the decision to move into a nursing home. "I don't want to be a burden to anyone," he had said with a reassuring smile, though the heaviness in his voice betrayed him. The nursing home wasn't far, but the absence of Bradley's cheerful voice in the house left a noticeable void. Shel and I often visited him, trying to keep his spirits high, but the house felt quieter, lonelier without him. Amidst these changes, Elijah's work required him to go overseas. "It's only for a short while," he said, holding my hand. "Maybe some time alone with Mom will be good for you. I'm sure she appreciates having you around. I'll be back before you know it." I could sense his thoughtfulness behind those words. He trusted me to look after things in his absence, and I found myself looking forward to spending quality time with Shel. At first, our days together were lighthearted and enjoyable. We shared meals, swapped stories, and even laughed over trivial things. But such tranquility didn't last long. One morning, Shel approached me with a lengthy shopping list that immediately caught my attention. "Wait, are you planning to buy all of this?" I asked, scanning the items in disbelief. "What's going on?" Her face lit up with a smile. "I've decided to host a little party for some neighborhood friends today. Can you help me prepare?" Her enthusiasm was infectious, and I readily agreed, happy to lend a hand. We spent the morning shopping for everything she needed, the bustle of errands keeping us both busy. Once we returned home, however, Shel handed me an apron and said, "Can you help with the cooking, too?" It was clear that my role in this impromptu celebration was far from over. It seemed like a daunting amount of work, but I thought that if Shel and I tackled it together, it could turn into an enjoyable experience, so I agreed to help. After hours of preparation, the food was ready, and the house was set up perfectly. Guests began arriving, filling the house with lively chatter and laughter. As the last guest entered, Shel turned to me and said, "Thank you for your help, we've got it from here." She then seamlessly shifted into the role of a gracious hostess, leaving me standing awkwardly on the sidelines. Not wanting to intrude, I decided to step outside for some fresh air. When I returned later, the house was eerily quiet, with remnants of the party scattered everywhere. Shel, however, was lounging on the couch, watching TV as if nothing needed to be done. I hesitated before asking, "Can you help with the cleanup?" To my shock, Shel, who had always been warm and kind, turned to me with an icy glare. "I'm not your real mother," she snapped. "Clean up without complaining. It's bold of you to even ask, considering your position as a daughter-in-law." Her words left me reeling. It felt as though the ground beneath me had shifted. The warmth I had always associated with her was gone, replaced by a cold, unfamiliar disdain. "I've been kind to you only because Elijah likes you," she continued, her voice cutting through the air. "He values you more than me, and I didn't particularly appreciate that. I knew about your inheritance all along, and I've been playing the role of the perfect mother-in-law. I was prepared to keep up the act for years, but things changed sooner than I expected. Frankly, it's a relief." I stared at her, stunned, struggling to process what I had just heard. "You must be joking," I whispered, hoping for some semblance of reassurance. Shel's lips curled into a bitter smile. "Why would I joke? Even after you married Elijah, I never saw you as family. Thank you for this wonderful house, but from now on, you'll follow my rules. If you don't like it, leave. This house belongs to us now. Your room will be a guest room, and you can sleep in the storage space under the stairs. It's just big enough for you to lie down." That night, I cleaned up the mess from the party alone, tears streaming down my face. I couldn't stop wondering if all her past kindness had been nothing but an act. In the days that followed, Shel's behavior only grew colder. She demanded more from me, piling on household chores while refusing to lend a hand herself. No matter how exhausted I was after work, I'd come home to find evidence of her tea parties with friends, half-empty cups, crumbs on the table, and dishes left in the sink. Cleaning up after these gatherings became a routine. The rare mornings I couldn't prepare breakfast on time were met with sharp complaints. The weight of her constant demands, combined with her cutting remarks, became unbearable. One day, I overheard her talking with her friends. Her laughter carried through the walls as she mocked me, recounting my efforts to keep the house in order. Anger and sadness surged within me, and the emotional toll finally drove me to request temporary leave from my job. Although I still endured Shel's verbal abuse and endless tasks, I found brief solace in the quiet hours when I could retreat to the storage space under the stairs. One afternoon, after finishing my chores early, I heard the front door open. Shel had returned with someone. Peeking through the gap in the storage door, I saw Neil, a local resident and one of Elijah's friends. Ever since my father-in-law had moved into a nursing home, Shel and Neil had been spending more time together. At first, I dismissed it as a harmless friendship, but the quiet intimacy between them and the way their gazes lingered hinted at something deeper. Then, to my horror, I saw them kiss. The sight confirmed what I had suspected but desperately tried to ignore. Shel was having an affair with Neil, right here in the house. I held my breath, willing the moment to pass, my mind racing as the betrayal sank in. The woman I had once admired and trusted had unraveled into someone I could barely recognize. I shut my eyes tightly, covering my ears, unable to endure the scene unfolding before me. The betrayal felt like a knife to my heart, but I knew I couldn't face it alone. In the following days, I resolved to visit Bradley at the nursing home. He had always been a calming presence, someone who could understand my pain without judgment. Before leaving the house that morning, I ran into Shel. Her eyes flicked to me with a smug look. "Heading out? Perfect timing. I'm having friends over tonight, so don't rush back." Her tone was casual, but the implication was clear. Fueled by anger and sadness, I hurried to the nursing home. Bradley greeted me warmly, but his expression shifted when he saw the turmoil on my face. "What's wrong, Kathleen?" he asked gently, his voice full of concern. Unable to hold it in, I poured out everything: Shel's cold treatment, the endless chores, and finally, the affair with Neil. Bradley listened carefully, his gaze steady, never interrupting. When I finished, he took a deep breath, his words deliberate and reassuring. "You've been carrying a heavy burden, Kathleen, but you must remember this isn't your fault. It seems Shel has lost her way, but you haven't. I'm glad you came to me. You're not alone in this. Elijah loves you, and so do I. I'll handle this matter, don't worry anymore. He stood, offering his hand with a gentle smile. Let's go home together, are you okay? Don't push yourself too hard. His kindness brought tears to my eyes. Thank you, Bradley. Your support means everything to me. For your sake, I'll endure anything. We walked back to the house together. As we approached, I noticed unfamiliar shoes scattered by the door, visitors who clearly assumed I wouldn't return anytime soon. Bradley didn't hesitate. He walked straight inside, his steps firm, and opened the living room door. There, Shel and Neil sat together, their conversation abruptly halting as they noticed us. Shel's face turned pale, and her eyes widened in shock. Neil, on the other hand, panicked, scrambling to his feet and stumbling toward the nearest window. He clumsily climbed out, barefoot and terrified, confirming what I already knew. If they were just friends, he wouldn't have fled like a guilty thief. Bradley turned to Shel, his tone calm but unyielding. Kathleen has told me everything. I'd like to hear your side of the story. Shel hesitated, her composure unraveling. Finally, she muttered, I apologize for the affair, but Neil approached me first. It wasn't entirely my fault. Bradley sighed deeply, his disappointment palpable. The affair is one issue, but the way you treated Kathleen, that's something I can't overlook. Before Shel could respond, Bradley pulled a stack of papers from his pocket and placed them on the table. Divorce papers. This ends today, he said firmly. Pack your things and leave. I won't tolerate your behavior any longer. Shel's composure crumbled. It was a one-time mistake. You can't blame me entirely. And why are you siding with her over me? She cried, her voice desperate. Bradley met her gaze evenly. I've come to see Kathleen as my own daughter. A real parent listens and understands, and I can see the pain you've caused her. It's clear you don't feel the same way. Shel lowered her head, unable to argue further. Leave by tonight, Bradley added. If you're still here tomorrow, I won't hesitate to involve the police. Defeated, Shel sank to her knees, silent. On Bradley's advice, I spent that night in a nearby hotel to give Shel time to leave. When I returned the next day, the house was quiet, and Shel was gone. I later heard she had moved to a small, run-down apartment in a neighboring town, financially strained after covering eldercare expenses. She had taken up several part-time jobs to make ends meet. A few days later, Elijah returned from his trip. When I told him everything that had happened, his face reflected a mix of shock and guilt. I had no idea this was going on, he said, pulling me into a comforting embrace. Thank God Dad was there to help. I'm so sorry you went through this. With Shel gone, the house returned to its peaceful state. Elijah and I began to rebuild our lives, cherishing the calm after the storm, and with hope in our hearts, we started making plans for the future. It wouldn't be long before this spacious house welcomed a new member to our growing family.